All right, this is the Big Douglas Show featuring rapper Big Pooh and our guest today, senior NBA writer for Sports Illustrated, Howard Beck. Howard, thanks for coming on today.
No, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
I was thinking earlier, Pooh, somebody was talking about the show the other day and they mentioned something about giving us our flowers for somebody to come on. It got me to thinking, at what age do we stop using or start using new lingo? I mean, I think I just stick with, giving people their propers, but maybe that's just me. Am I yelling people off the lawn, or how do we work that?
Man, I think you just use the lingo you're familiar and comfortable with, and it's new lingo every 2-3 months coming on the scene. I'm an old guy myself, so I can't keep up with all the fresh new lingo that happens. I'm an old get off my lawn guy in that regard.
Howard, how does that work for you in an industry that's basically getting younger every year?
It is getting younger every year. It makes me feel old, frankly. I've been covering the league, for, the NBA for 24 years. So the number of times like lingo, trends, fashion, whatever has changed in that period of time, I've lost track. But like I'm on Twitter way too much, and the give fill in the blank their flowers. I feel like it really exploded over the last few months. I'm sure by the time I see it, it means it's already been out there for probably years. And so I'm going to be way behind, but it's unavoidable now. And like the first time I saw it, I was like, flower, why? Oh, okay. Like a bouquet, whatever. Okay, fine, I guess. And then all of a sudden I just started seeing it everywhere, and it's fine. Whatever. I don't see myself using that phrase. I'd probably sound like even a bigger doofus than I would normally if I tried to pull it off. So I'm not going to.
Yeah, it's all about using, even when you hear the new lingo, it's about using it in the right context, which a lot of us older guys tend to mess up from time to time. So I stick to what I know.
Absolutely. Amen.
Howard, if I'm right, you worked the beat for the Lakers during Shaq and Kobe, then worked the Knicks beat during Carmelo years. But I would suggest, as a guy like myself that had Sports Illustrated covers up on the wall, that Sports Illustrated gig is something special.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. When I was covering Shaq and Kobe, I was at the LA Daily News, which is, like the second paper in the market, generously speaking, not the LA Times, but great gig, great place to live, loved covering them. But I was at the LA Daily News. When I got the job at the New York Times in 2004, like that was a moment. That was huge for me as someone who, my years as an aspiring journalist, my teenage years and my college years, like the New York Times is it's the pinnacle of American journalism, as far as I'm concerned, print journalism, best newspaper in the world. But Sports Illustrated was the magazine that I grew up on, because if it's a more narrow goal here, right? Like journalism, New York Times, but sports writing specifically, and tied back to my fandom as a kid that got me into reading about sports, SI was always the pinnacle and the dream job from the moment that I decided to start down this path. And so I never knew if that would ever actually come to pass. As I say, like the New York Times was a huge moment in and of itself. It's wild now that I will have checked off both of these very large boxes on any young sports writer's dream list. It's amazing. Feel very, very fortunate, and really glad to be there. Started with SI in late December, and so still early on, and I still haven't met most of the people that I'm working with and working for, because it's pandemic. We can't meet anybody. So it's been an interesting way to start a new gig. But it's been fantastic. I love SI, and I have for let's just say a very long time. I don't want to actually date myself that badly. But I've been a loyal subscriber for, let's say, in the neighborhood of decades.
Nice. Howard, being that you covered the Lakers team, can you speak a little bit to the legacy that of Elgin Baylor, who recently just passed away?
Yeah, before my time, I don't go back that far. But, and it's interesting too. Let me start with the framework for how I was first introduced to who Elgin Baylor was when I first got there. Cause I'm from Northern California originally. So I didn't even grow up in a Laker crazed environment. I was not steeped in the knowledge of the Lakers history when I first got to LA to cover the Lakers in 1997. In 97, the Clippers, of course, their GM is Elgin Baylor, who I know as being a Laker legend and being an all-time NBA great and a Hall of Famer and all that. But by that time, it's already fairly well established. One, the Clippers are awful. This pathetic, sad sack franchise with this terrible owner. We didn't even know how truly, truly terrible Donald Sterling was until I think later. But at a minimum, you knew he was cheap and ran that franchise terribly. And Elgin Baylor was hamstrung by that, but he was also part of that. And so it sucks that and I think for a lot of people in LA, and certainly people of a certain generation and younger, would just know him as, oh yeah, he's the guy who ran the Clippers all those years when, then they drafted Michael Olowokandi and, and then they briefly had this fun team with, Quentin Richardson and Darius Smiles and these guys but for the most part, he just got associated with the Clippers because he was there a pretty long time. And, Elgin Baylor's greatness as a player is overlooked in a lot of ways for a bunch of different reasons, not least of which those, of course, we just don't have as much familiarity with the imagery from back then. There's less footage. People haven't been exposed to it as much. But for people who don't know, Elgin Baylor is the reason that we eventually had Dr. J and Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant and anyone else in that 6'6" range who are high flyers, these aerial acrobats, incredibly creative in midair, the hang time and the things that you could do with the ball to avoid a defender or make a basket while elevating, avoiding, soaring, like all of that, everything that we think about, like the most fun, the most exhilarating aspects of the NBA, this incredibly artistic game, goes back to Elgin Baylor because nobody did those things until Elgin Baylor did them. He was also very strong in civil rights movement at the time. The story has been circulated a number of times in the last couple of days since he passed in all the tributes to him about him. I think they were in West Virginia with and he's with the Lakers, and the hotel does not want to allow in anyone on the team who's black, and they basically say we're out of here. It led to the NBA, I think, creating a policy where they weren't going to contract with hotels that had any discriminatory policies. He was part of course, a threatened player boycott when I believe when they were first unionizing, but at the All-Star game where he was the Lakers owner at the time was threatening them with their jobs, and they stood fast and as the players, and he was a huge voice in that. So it goes well beyond his basketball abilities, but Elgin, you can go look up the numbers. I think he's third highest career average in NBA history. Just one of the all-time greats. I did not really get to know him. I was fully immersed. The thing with the Shaq and Kobe era was, as you guys know, a lot of drama. And so it was kind of all consuming. And so I spent, a lot of time, all my time, immersed in that. And so the only time I even saw the Clippers was when the Lakers and Clippers were playing each other. So, and Elgin kind of kept close counsel too. He was not somebody who was really, real eager to engage or chit chat. That's not to say that he didn't have that relationship with some members of the media, but by the time I got there, I think he was, I would say, a little closed off. So I really did not know him well at all, but obviously a big loss for the NBA and basketball in general.
One of the great players I'll always remember in my mind is the Syracuse Carmelo Anthony, just one of the greatest players I can remember at that level. But when he gets remembered with the rest of that draft class, I think people will forget about just how good he was, maybe still is. I wonder how he gets lost in the shuffle with those other great guys from that class.
Yeah, he's going to finish top 10 all time in scoring for sure. I don't know that he can get to top 5. I did this exercise recently just to see if the math worked out. I don't think he can get there. He'd have to score a lot of points in the next few years, and he's up there in years. So, but he's going to be top 10. And so he's going to go down at a minimum as one of the all-time great scorers. Will people consider him one of the all-time great players, right? Those that can sometimes be a different connotation. One of the great scorers, one of the great players, like Dominique, one of the all-time great scorers, all-time great player, eye of the beholder kind of thing. You got to win in this league sometimes for people to really recognize you and elevate you to that strata, that echelon. And LeBron's got his rings, and Dwayne Wade's got his rings, and Chris Bosh has his rings. Obviously, some of those came together. LeBron also got others elsewhere, and Wade got one with Shaq before LeBron had arrived. And so, it depends on how you evaluate this, right? Some people are caught up only in the rings. I wouldn't judge Carmelo. I wouldn't judge any player by rings alone. I think that's foolish and incredibly overly simplistic. However, it is fair to judge a guy based on the totality of his career and his postseason success in particular. And, Carmelo forced his way to the Knicks a year after he had been, it was 2 years by the time he got to the Knicks, but at the time he started agitating for the trade, he was a year removed from the Western Conference Finals, Nuggets' best season. And it wasn't enough. He forced his way out at a time that I thought the Nuggets were actually on a pretty good path. And they had Masai Ujiri, one of the best GMs in the league. We were just starting to learn about how really good Masai was, but Carmelo wanted New York, and that's fine. But by forcing his way to New York, by not waiting for free agency, by making it a trade, it robbed the Knicks of a lot of assets. It hamstrung them for years to come. He himself, years later, finally acknowledged that he kind of put them in a tough spot, and it made it harder to build around him. And the style of Carmelo's game was also very much a, isolation, dominating the ball quite a bit, was never a high assist guy. And so, really, really talented, an incredible scorer, a scorer that teams feared. But the lack of postseason success, no conference finals since that Western Conference Finals back in whatever it was, I think 2009. It makes it hard to when you put him when you put his career in context of everybody else's postseason success, taking into account everything, I do think it's fair to put him down a notch or two. Not about rings, but postseason success overall. Did you lead your team somewhere? Did you make them better? And because he wasn't a eager playmaker, again, never had great assist totals for a guy with the ball in his hands so much, wasn't particularly dedicated to defense for a lot of those years. Those things are all fair game. And it's not to be overly harsh. He's a great guy. Loved covering Carmelo for the couple of years that I was still on the Knicks. We really only overlapped. He got there in 2011. I left the Times in 2013. So it was really only a couple seasons. I mean, I'm still in New York, of course, but I wasn't covering the Knicks after that. So, but great guy to deal with. Love talking to him. Really great with the media, always accountable. Never held anything against you. He's not a guy with grudges, whatever. Like, he's just a really good dude. And a great scorer. And, if people want to draw a line between great scorer and great player, I think the things I brought up that's where you might draw the line. But that's in the eye of the beholder.
Howard, as someone who covered the Knicks for a period of time, besides being hamstrung by the Carmelo trade, what happened to the New York Knicks? They used to be this team that people long to go play for, and in the Garden, it represents basketball, but nobody wants to go there anymore.
Well, we'll see. I mean, there you can start to see the outline of a Knicks potential renaissance here. I don't want to say an actual renaissance, because it's placing way too much stock in a very short period of time so far. But new front office. Again, they've had many since in the time I've been in New York, but a new front office, Thibodeau as coach, taking largely the same roster as last year, most of the roster, and taking a team that was terrible, one of the worst in the East, to being nightly competitive in the thick of the playoff race, hovering around 500, and we'll see where they end up. Maybe they make the playoffs, maybe they make the play in. I've said this many times, and I'll say it again. I don't think it matters whether they make the playoffs or not. This season should be judged by progress in terms of the development of their young players and their just general competitiveness. And are they earning respect again? Because to your question, part of the reason that they have been as bad as they've been, as long as they've been, it just kind of compounds, right? The worse you are, the more dysfunctional you are, the more times you fire the front office and fire the head coach, the more times you have incidents like, ejecting Charles Oakley. All of these things add up, and it creates an image of this is not a place that I should entrust my career if I'm a player, especially if you're a high caliber player, if you're a star, an all-star, superstar. And so guys have steered away. Is what they've done so far this season enough to make guys reconsider? I think they've got people's attention now. I think people are saying, okay, look at this, it's only a few months, wait against years. So you're not going to, say, okay, everything's fine now immediately, but they seem to be on the right path. And I think this front office is doing some things smarter than the last few did in terms of the way they're managing assets and not overspending for, some middling free agent, being protective of their picks so far, and just kind of take it methodically. And one of the things that I've seen, so I've been here for, 17 years now in New York, and, including 9 of those where I was covering the Knicks day to day. And, the Knicks repeat certain things, certain problems they repeat over. And what's, that whole thing about, the definition of insanity is, doesn't work and you keep doing it. Paraphrasing. But that's the Knicks. They're always swinging for the fences. They're always trying to win the trade, win the back pages of the tabs, and do something flashy, get a big name. And that big name might be Carmelo Anthony. It might be Amari Stoudemire with his, uninsurable knees back in the day, though that was a really exciting moment. Like that was an exhilarating moment for the Knicks, for New York. And the first few months of his time here was a lot of fun to watch too. Those teams were really enjoyable, but still they're always making these big swings, and they're going for names. So it's, whether that's Isaiah Thomas because he's a name. Well, is he the right choice as team president? Larry Brown, a name. Was he the right choice as coach? Were he and Isaiah right for each other, to say nothing of Marbury in that mix? Phil Jackson, never run a team before, but we're going to hire him as team president. Over and over and over again, they're going for name value, whether it's the coach, the GM or president, the fading star players. They're constantly making the same mistake. And it's about trying to win the headline, trying to win the press conference instead of building something sustainable, something solid. And we always talk about culture in the NBA and what's a winning culture and which teams have good culture, which teams have bad culture, all this stuff. And that can get worn out a little as a term, but it does have significance. And there are teams, if I asked you guys, what are the teams that you think have a great culture in the NBA? There are like 3 or 4 you would name off the top of your head and that everybody would agree on. And it doesn't even take that long. Like I'll ask, like, who are the teams? When I say great culture in the NBA, like who do you think of immediately?
Golden State.
Sure.
The Lakers now.
Sure.
And who is that third one?
Well, I would say like Miami, San Antonio,
Antonio. Yeah.
Toronto. And it's not just because of recent championships. It's about, what those teams are about. Like Jimmy Butler went to Miami because he knew exactly what Heat culture was, and it fit who Jimmy Butler is. And that's identifiable. And we all know what it is. And we all know who that starts with. It starts with Pat Riley. But, the ownership of a team has a lot to do with whether a culture is positive, negative, consistent. And the Knicks have one of the worst owners in the NBA in James Dolan. That's pretty well established. I don't think anybody or very few people would dispute that. And one of the ways you identify a bad culture with a sports team is, one, do they have any identifiable values as a team that you think are positive, right? Like you look at them and you say, well, what are the values of the Knicks? Well, I don't know. They change every 6 months or every couple of years because they keep flushing away front offices and coaches. In fact, I ran the numbers recently. The Knicks have had, they lead the league in front office changes and coaching changes in the last 20 years, which is roughly Dolan's time as owner. You can't get a consistent culture. You can't get a consistent set of values and a structure for consistency and consistent team building if you're constantly changing course and constantly putting somebody new in. And you can say, well, they were justified when they fired this guy or fired that guy because it wasn't working. And yeah, okay, that's fine. But that means you hired the wrong person. Like, even if we all agree Phil Jackson was not the right choice as president, and he wasn't, but you hired him. It's like, so that's still on you. You made that error in judgment. I don't think Steve Mills was a great choice, and he's hired him like 17 times in the last 20 years. So, that's where you get, and it's a long-winded answer, but there's a lot that's happened in 20 years. That's where the Knicks are. They're trying to, this latest group, Leon Rose and his group, along with Tom Thibodeau, are trying to kind of reverse everything that has happened for the last 20 years and establish a new understanding of what the Knicks are and what they're about. And again, early returns are good, but these are early steps. They're still a long ways from being, perennial contenders. And I don't know, like, if the, free agency opened tomorrow, would stars and their agents see them differently now than they did 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago? Maybe. Might want a bigger sample size before we know that.
It's funny. It sounds so much like the Washington football team, right? Where it's like, I mean, that sounded like you explaining them, you can do all these things and head in the right direction, but if the same man owns the team and won't get out of the way for smart people to do what it is that they do well, what are you supposed to do about that?
Well, real quick, Doug, because you said something important. I always say this about owners in the NBA. The job of the owner is hire the right people, smart people, and then get the hell out of the way. Cut the checks, and listen, by all means, ask tough questions. Press your team president or your GM on these decisions. Is this really the right trade? Explain why it's the right trade. Explain why we're going to drop $200 million on this particular free agent. By all means, ask tough questions, press them, hold them accountable, be involved even. But there's a fine line between being involved and being meddling. And, the first step is hire the right people and then get the hell out of the way. The problem is that a lot of these owners don't know how to hire the right people. They don't even know who the right people are. And so they hire somebody who's close to them or that they trust or that they've got a relationship with. And Dolan has done that many, many times, of hiring somebody who either was recommended by a buddy of his or it was just somebody that he really liked. He obviously really liked Steve Mills. He liked Isaiah. He still talks to Isaiah and has him counsel him all the time, despite everything that went wrong during Isaiah's official time with the Knicks. You got to just find the best basketball people, put them in place, and then get out of the way.
Howard, you're also one half of the Crossover podcast. I'm curious, because we get mixed answers on this when we ask writers. Do you prefer the podcasting or the writing?
Writing is torture. Right?
And that's like, what we hear.
The best thing about a podcast is that, you interview somebody for a story, you interview somebody for the podcast. Let's say it's the same person, and you have this great conversation. Talk to them for 30 minutes, really enjoyable. Love the feedback you got, had fun with it. When the podcast is over, as you guys know, you hit stop. And I don't even know what happens after that because I don't do any of the technical stuff. Somebody else does all the producing, processing, uploading, but I don't even have to deal with that. So the podcast is great because when it's over, it's just over. When that same interview is over, but it's for a story, now I have to transcribe. I got to listen to myself and my own stupid rambling questions again. I gotta, type, keep up with the recording when I'm replaying it. Then I got to organize my thoughts. I probably have to do 5 other interviews as well. And then I got to write. And, as I say, writing is torture. And so I love doing both. And the podcasting, I started podcasting, I think it's been 4 years now almost. when I was at Bleacher Report, when we started the full 48. And at the time I was a little leery. I'd done some radio for NBA radio on Sirius XM. I'm like, am I a podcast host? I don't know. Does this make sense for me? I'm really a writer, but this seems like fun. And it's great to expand your repertoire at any stage of your career. And I got to the point where like, I realized, oh my God, I really like this. This is fun. This is great. I really enjoy this a lot. I want to keep this as part of whatever my routine is, wherever I am for the rest of my career. And it's a different muscle to flex than writing. I like having a balance. In the years that I was a beat writer, I was writing at the times, I think I averaged like 260 stories a year or something, covering the Knicks primarily. And then the rest of the NBA. When the Knicks were out, I would go cover the playoffs and cover the finals. And so it's a lot. When I was at the LA Daily News covering the Lakers, my byline count back then, it was a different routine there, was over 300. So by the time I started doing a podcast, I'd written literally thousands of stories, some shorter, some longer, whatever, but still thousands of stories. After a while, like, all right, it's nice to try something different and mix it up so that some days I'm writing, some days I'm podcasting, some days I'm doing video. The beauty of the way media has evolved by this point in my career is that there are a lot of different things you can do and actually kind of need to do. You need to be able to do a lot of stuff to have a career these days and make yourself attractive to employers. So I'm glad media's evolved the way it has. I could have spent my entire career just writing and I probably would have been fine, but this is actually more enjoyable getting to kind of mix it up.
Howard, with the addition of the play-in tourney for the NBA, they're carrying it over this year from the bubble. Do you think that this trade deadline, which happens tomorrow, is going to be, or can you explain how there's more sellers or more buyers during the trade deadline this year, as opposed to a regular season when it will be only 8 teams and you'll kind of know by this point?
Yeah. So as we all record this right now, we are 24 hours and 30 minutes away from the trade deadline. So I want to put that in context in case anything has happened by the time people listen to this. But it could be a wild next 24 hours. It could be a dud. If it is a dud, we are all going to point to the play-in tournament as a big reason for it, because now all you have to do, is finish within the top 10 in the conference, right? 15 teams in each conference, 2 or 3 in each that are definitely out. And everybody else feels like, well, I don't know if I can make it to 8th, but I can get to 10th. Mm-hmm. So suddenly teams that in a different year would have been pulling the plug, we're pivoting to the youth. We're going to, give our young guys whatever, we're going to make up injuries for our veterans. All the stuff that we're normally used to seeing might not happen in the same way. And so if everybody believes they're in it, then yes, you have fewer sellers. And so if we get a dud of a trade deadline, I think that will be a big reason. And a lot of people have speculated that that's what will in fact happen. But this league has a way of surprising you. And there are certainly a lot of teams that are motivated to make moves. And if I will potentially live to regret this prediction, there are 3 names that I feel like are most likely to move. I don't want to say definite, but it really, really feels like there's a lot of momentum on Oladipo, on Aaron Gordon, on Kyle Lowry. If some combination of those 3 or all 3 go like that, that's about what I expect now. Everything after that, I'm not sure, but you definitely have fewer teams that are ready to just kind of like blow it up and tear down and, play for next year, play for ping pong balls. And that's the other piece of this too, of course, is that when they, enacted lottery reform a couple of years ago and changed the odds, now it's, finishing with a bottom 3 record or the worst record doesn't guarantee you of a top 3 pick anymore or a top 4 pick. And so, there's a lot more volatility in the lottery and a lot less incentive to tank, which was the point of changing the lottery odds. So the combination of that and the play-in tournament could put a damper on all the activity that we hope to see in the next 24 hours.
You mentioned the draft. Has that worked the way they had hoped to? I mean, it's tough for teams like our Wizards that do bad and you're hoping for good picks, and it seems like we never get that high. And as a fan, it's frustrating, right? To have your team be real bad and then not be rewarded at the end for or going through that misery. How does the NBA feel this has worked?
I think they're happy with it so far, in that it does seem to be changing behavior a little bit. Teams do seem to be less eager to just bottom out, pull the plug on everything, strip their roster, or shut guys down the stretch. Because not every tanking example is the same, right? People think of the Sixers primarily because it was a multi-year tank, and it was very brazen, and it was very obvious and direct. This is what we're doing, and we're going to do it for multiple years, because the idea of the process was not, just be bad and ace every pick. It was no. The draft is volatile. The draft is unpredictable. Get as many bites at the apple as you can to come up with some stars. And it worked. They got Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, two top 15 players. The reason you do a multi-year tank is because if you only did 2 years in a row, well, one of those years you might miss. You might get Jahlil Okafor. You might get, an Evan Turner. You might get a Hashim Thabit. You might get, there are plenty of top 3, top 5 picks that have not turned out to be stars, or much less superstars. So they gave themselves the most opportunities possible. Most teams didn't go that route. Most teams, when we talk about tanking, nobody has the stomach for that. It's a pull the plug on a given year, or maybe they're bad a couple years in a row. Teams that are usually in the lottery, like the Kings have been in the lottery for, I think it's 14 years running now, potentially coming up on a 15th year. That's not because the Kings have been tanking for 15 years. They've just been incompetent. And the lottery reform was aimed at dissuading teams from ever trying again what the Sixers did, or even the more modest versions of that you sometimes see. But the idea of a reverse order draft in the first place was help the teams that need the most help. Well, the teams that need the most help, maybe it's because they had injuries, maybe they just had bad luck, or maybe they're just bad at their jobs. Maybe they have a terrible owner and terrible GMs, and they draft terribly. They sign they give out bad contracts, and then they just suck. They suck because they're bad, not because it was intentional. Those are one thing I like. This is why I always say, like with the Sixers, I respected it on this level. I would rather, if I were rooting for a team, I'd rather have them be bad by design than by incompetence. And most teams that are perennially in the lottery, it's by incompetence. So it sucks for a team like yours that it's some combination of some bad decisions and some bad luck. But, lottery reform does punish a team like the Wizards and some others that are certainly trying to make progress. But if you can't draft high, and we know that most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, the best talent is within those top 2-3 picks, it's hard. It's hard. I don't know what the answer is there exactly, but it's tough. And it's especially tough for markets that are not destination markets, because there's only 3 ways to get star talent in this league: draft, trade, and free agency. And there's a lot of markets in this league where you are not a free agent destination. So if you're the Memphis Grizzlies, you're not landing Kevin Durant or LeBron James or anybody of that stature as a free agent. You can try to trade for them, but they're going to signal ahead of time, well, I don't want to stay there, and I'm not going to sign an extension. So now 2 tools are already off the board. Now you're down to just the draft. And if the draft is a crapshoot, if the lottery odds are the way they are now, or if they were even flatter, now you really have, almost no shot at getting top level talent. So, these are things the NBA spends a lot of time thinking about. And, it's, I don't know that the system is anywhere close to perfect. I don't know that there is a perfect system, but that's what they're constantly trying to adjust.
Speaking of incompetence, I do want to ask you, what is the national opinion on the Wizards in the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I don't know that there's some great consensus out there from whether it's national writers or whether it's rest of the league, other teams, other executives. I'll just say that, and I've had this, I have found myself in this position with regard to the Wizards for the last couple of years. And I said this directly to Tommy Shepard on my podcast last summer. And I said, tell me why I'm wrong. I think Bradley Beal should ask out. I think it's actually best for all parties if the Wizards and Bradley Beal part ways. And it's not any judgment on any of them. It's more that the Wizards are kind of stuck. They've got, I was looking at for next season, Beal, Westbrook, and Bertans are making, I think, 95 million. That's almost the entire salary cap between three players, one of whom, Westbrook, is on the decline, one of whom, Bertans, has not lived up to the contract. And then there's Bradley Beal. I respect the hell out of him for never demanding a trade and saying, I want to finish my career in Washington. It takes a lot to decide I'm going to do that and I'm going to stick it out. And I can do nothing but respect that. But when I look at the books, when I look at who they have, I don't know where the path is to title contention for him. And if that's the goal, how does it happen there? Unless you have huge leaps. If Denny Avdia and Rui Hachimura become, if not stars, then at least a step below that, you got to have some guys just bust out along the way. And I don't know where that's coming from necessarily. And if you trade him, if you can get a sweetheart deal like the Thunder got for Paul George, or something akin to what the Pelicans got for Anthony Davis, you can set yourself up. You can put yourself in a lot better position to build out for the next 3 to 5, 6 years than what they've got right now. I feel like they're just kind of stuck. And I thought they were stuck before the Wall Westbrook swap because of Wall's health issues and the mileage on him. So I'm sorry, that's not a very optimistic analysis. But I wonder too, like, everybody's got their breaking point. A year plus before James Harden demanded his trade, I had sat down with him when he was here in New York for a sneaker event, and he had said, I want to finish my career in Houston. I don't want to be a part of a super team. I mean, literally those were if not the exact words, those were the sentiments. I don't want to go join up with somebody else. I want guys to come here, and I want to finish my career here, and I want to win titles in Houston. And a year plus later, he's demanding a trade and going to Brooklyn to create a super team with Kyrie and Kevin Durant. And again, I'm not saying, aha, gotcha, whatever. I'm not blaming him, and I'm not mad about it. Like, your priorities change. All of ours do in life. I didn't know I was going to live in New York. I didn't know I was going to be here for 17 years. I love it here. Things change. And so will Bradley Beal wake up one morning and decide, you know what, I gave it my best shot, just isn't working, and I'm in my prime, and I want to make sure I give myself a chance to win titles, or at least be on a team that's one of the top 4 or 5 in the NBA, then maybe he wakes up one day and makes that request. Or maybe something happens for the Wizards, smart people working for that organization. There may be a change in direction, or one transaction that changes everything, that we can't foresee right now. Those things happen too. So I'm not saying it's some foregone conclusion. It's just, that's, as I kind of game it out in my own head, that's the way I kind of see it.
And the problem there is, if you trade Beal, it's to a contender most likely, right? And then, you're getting 3 first-round picks, but if they're all down in the 20s, I'm not sure what does it get for you, really?
Yeah, it is tough in that regard, right? You're kind of trading him to a team that's a high-level team. If not a contender, then maybe they're a middle-of-the-pack team that thinks they're going to become a contender by adding him. And by definition, their picks are going to be end of first round. You're kind of trading him, hoping that, it'll be like a Nets scenario where the Nets crashed and burned after sending all their picks to Boston, and Boston ends up with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. That's what you're kind of hoping for. Or you're making a deal with a team that has not just their own picks, right? Can you make a deal with a team that has some picks from one of the crappy teams that you think will convey a higher pick? Or you're taking those picks and you're hoping to repackage them for the next star that you're hoping to acquire. Or maybe you're using those picks to then offload Westbrook's contract. I don't know. There's any number of ways you can go about it, but I just know this: a team with an aging Westbrook, Beal, and Bertans making what he's making, looking at their payroll, it's really tough to see how you make dramatic improvements.
Yeah, I often wonder if the Wizards had a new coaching staff come in, like the Knicks did with Tom Thibodeau. He's running back pretty much the same team that was there last year, and you see a marked difference if something like that could happen for the Wizards. Because I think that Scott Brooks, while he's well liked that situation has run its course in Washington.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, sometimes the coaching change is what sparks a team's turnaround, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you're just hamstrung by your actual personnel. And what Tibbs has shown in New York in the early, I should say it's more than early, what Tibbs has shown in New York through the first half plus of this season is you can get a team that was abysmal defensively, and with the right coaching, the right approach, get them to become really good defensively. Now they've slipped quite a bit in the last month or so, but still they're so diligent on that end of the court that their offensive deficiencies and their lack of high-end offensive talent hasn't hurt them as much. So they've been able to win games that they wouldn't have in prior years just through a defensive approach that has made them a tough out, as we say, right? So they're always in games and they don't give up. If you look at prior Tibbs teams, there are also sometimes some limits to that, right? Year 2, year 3, sometimes things start to wane. Year 4, he's got a hard driving style. Not everybody responds well to that, or will stay warm to it. It might be great on day 1, like, okay, great, I'm all in. And then after a year or so of it, it's, you get a little worn out. That has happened. And he's not the only one. There are other coaches who are in that kind of that kind of personality. It can be a little bit tough for players, and not everybody wants to play for that style. So the early returns are good. Is it sustainable? We'll see. The Knicks still need a lot of upgrades in terms of just sheer talent. The Wizards need a lot of upgrades in terms of sheer talent outside of their backcourt. And so a coaching change alone is not going to change them. And that's the thing too. Like, Tibbs hasn't solved the Knicks' problems. If we're comparing and contrasting here, he hasn't solved anything. He has, in the short term, made them more competitive, more defensive minded, and again, as I said earlier, respectable. And they might even make the playoffs. But they still need more talent. Like, it's fine. That's a 1-year return. Okay, great. We're the 8th seed. Okay, great. We're in the playoffs. We're not the laughing stock anymore. But you have to keep building on that, and that requires higher level of talent. Like, everything in the NBA comes back to talent. If you can get a top 5 player, great. If you can't get a top 5 player, hopefully you get a couple of top 15 or a couple of top 20, or 3 top 30, right? Like, there's all these different approaches you can take, because there's only so many guys who are franchise transformative players on their own, right? There's only so many Steph Curry, LeBron, KD types, Kawhi Leonard. So the Knicks still need that guy. And the Wizards, Bradley Beal is one of those guys, but obviously he needs a tag team partner, and preferably, somebody in the front court, I would think.
Absolutely.
Howard, we appreciate so much the time you gave us today. We got coming up on the podcast and for the magazine.
So I'm trying to think of so we just posted our trade preview podcast on the crossover with Chris Mannix and me. That is up right now, the crossover podcast from SI. Next week, I imagine we'll be breaking down whatever happens or doesn't happen tomorrow. We've got our NBA team, myself, Chris Mannix, Chris Herring, Michael Pena, Rohan Nadkarni. Monday through Friday, we have what we call the morning shoot around. Each one of us has a day of the week. I am on Mondays, so my next piece on the morning shoot around. Got an idea for what that might be this coming Monday, but I'll hold that in reserve for the moment. But you can find my next byline on a topic to be named Monday morning at si.com.
And let the people know where they can find you on Twitter, Howard.
Very easy, at Howard Beck. No underscores, no fancy, no numbers in place of letters, nothing crazy, just at Howard Beck. Pretty easy to spell. You can find me there, but appreciate that. Thank you for giving me the plug, and thanks for having me on.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Have a good one.
Thanks, guys. All right, take care.